I just like to, smoke a joint every now and then.
Good people don't smoke marijuana.
You dick!
Welcome to VoteProPot-Cast, brought to you by VoteProPot.com.
While there is plenty of anecdotal evidence that cannabis helps children with Dravet's, the Drug Enforcement Administration classifies marijuana among the most dangerous drugs, a Schedule I controlled substance. As far as the federal government is concerned, cannabis has no currently accepted medical use and a high potential for abuse. As a result, scientists have trouble accessing the drug legally to do the research. And so we know precious little about the medicinal value of marijuana to treat epilepsy or anything else.
Today's episode of Vote Pro Podcast features Jay taking us through a discussion about what's commonly known as, quote-unquote, medical marijuana. He'll give us a brief history of cannabis in medicine, followed by an overview in layman's terms of the chemistry and physiology of how cannabis interacts with human anatomy and some of the many health applications for cannabis. And finally, we'll talk about where the law stands in terms of allowing cannabis to be used medically, followed by news and updates. I'm Phil Adams.
I'm Jay Britton.
I'm Andrew McCready's.
And that opening clip was featured on a recent segment of PBS NewsHour that they did on medical marijuana.
We'd love to hear from you. Send us an email at votepropot@gmail.com.
Or check us out at VoteProPot.com.
Please like and follow us at Facebook.com/VoteProPot.
And if you like what you hear, we'd really love it if you could leave us a review and a rating, hopefully a 5-star rating, on iTunes Store.
Hemp has been harvested for at least 5,000 years by humankind and used for many applications, from making rope, obviously, and clothing, to medicine, making bricks for building houses, everything. So it's been a very prolific plant used throughout mankind for thousands of years. So, and used even in the United States, it was probably the most popular over-the-counter medicine until relatively recently, until 100 years ago, early 1900s. So we're going to explore whether or not it really has medicinal value. And the problem in the United States, I think, guys, is that most of the evidence is anecdotal because nobody's allowed to really research it, or very few people are allowed to research it in the United States because it's a Schedule I drug.
There's no hard science behind it that we can really lean on.
Not enough, but there's so much anecdotal evidence that's beginning to change, and laws are changing, obviously. So that's going to change very soon. It's going to be much easier to get for research centers to get the proper types of cannabis, different, strengths and different chemical compounds to do the tests, to do human trials, to find out whether or not it really works like so many people think it does now, which it appears it does.
So, Jay, what is it? Tell us what we do know about cannabis and its chemical properties, its physical properties. How much can we say at this point?
Well, it appears that the CBD, I guess a little history, there's Professor Meckelland at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. He's been working with cannabis since 1964.
Wow.
And he and his department discovered the compounds, and there are hundreds of compounds in cannabis, some in very small amounts. But the big ones and the obvious are the THC and CBDs. Now, from what they understand to date, and Andrew knows a lot about this, probably more than me, CBD seem to have a lot of medicinal value, and they don't have that quality of getting you high. THC, on the other hand, does get you high. Now, one of the interesting facts is that hemp is hemp. Cannabis is cannabis. It's a genus. It's one plant, but it's veered off into several different species. So you've got what we call hemp, which is just a plant with very low THC. And then you've got what we call marijuana, which is the same plant with high THC. Now, there are different compounds, and there are, like I said, hundreds of compounds in the hemp plant.
What does it stand for?
Oh, you're going to make me say it?
THC is tetrahydrocannabinol.
Thank you. That was excellent. And CBD.
It was a rhetorical question.
Yeah, well.
When you hear the term CBD, they're talking about cannabinoids.
One of the things that the doctor discovered is that our bodies have a cannabinoid receptor system. So that's the reason we get high or that we have positive influences from CBD. It's because we have receptors in our body and in our brain. And when these latch to those receptors, they cause different functions within our body. One of the things that seems to be apparent to so many people, and there's a million stories out there of people who have epilepsy who take CBD specifically and have a tremendous results. I mean, their tremors go away. So one of the things that CBD seems to work towards is stopping shaking and tremors, which there are several different diseases, MS and many diseases that cause that. It seems very apparent. But again, we haven't been in a position to do the large human trials. We've tested it on mice. We've tested it on very small human trials, experimental. But what we need to be able to do is have regulations and be able to draw the compounds out of the plants. And one of the things that this doctor seems to have noticed is that the effects of these compounds are magnified by combinations. So, in other words, one of the things that they've discovered is, over the years, obviously people say, wow, when I smoked marijuana in the 70s, it wasn't nearly as strong. Well, that is absolutely true. The percentage of THCs was in the 5 to 10% range in those days. Now you can get it up to like 15, 20% because of the hybrids. And, it's crazy.
Actually, you can find them in the 30s.
No kidding.
What happened was during the prohibition of cannabis, growers were always trying to grow better weed. So what they're doing, they were crossbreeding different strains until they're getting strains with really high THC levels. But they didn't really understand the whole plant chemistry. So what they were also doing were driving down the CBDs. So that's why when some people smoke this pot that's been grown recently, they get a different experience than they did in the 70s.
Exactly.
Is because this high THC, low CBD ratio. And what happens is cannabis will affect the anxiety portion of the brain. And normally when you smoke the old weed, it will just mellow the anxiety level out, and you'd feel great, mellowed out. But what happens with this off-balanced pot is it actually excites the anxiety center of the brain, and you get really paranoid. And that's why some people will tell you about experiences when they get, hyper and very unpleasant experience.
But the growers didn't understand this because they were just trying to make it stronger. Because
Correct.
Marijuana is a bulky substance, and it's fairly easy for law enforcement to interdict. So they want to get more high per pound, I think.
Sure. To increase profits. Right.
And more dollars per pound, right?
Yeah, the higher
one of the things that they've discovered, mostly through trials on mice, is what Andrew is alluding to, and that is there's a definite reaction between the two, between the CBD and the THC. So in other words, if you take this amount of THC and ingest it, you get what it does to you is completely different than what if you ingest the exact same amount of THC, but you add CBD to it. The two interact with each other, and they think that may be the case as well in a medicinal case. So in other words, CBD may work. They may think, well, this is going to be perfect for seizures, but maybe you need a certain blend of THC for the best effect. So that's where chemistry comes in, and that's where research comes in. And we can't, like the clip we heard earlier, the research has not been done because it's a Schedule I drug. Being a Schedule I drug means that the drug has no medicinal value, which means you can't get a permit, you can't get a license to get the material to do the testing.
You need to get it off Schedule I, get the CDC involved, and get some pharmaceutical company money behind the research.
Well, so far, it's very difficult or impossible to do research in the United States. And when you can, there's only one source to get it from through the government. And they have very limited strains. I've heard one or very few numbers of strains. And that's where the secret in doing cannabis research lies, is different strains are going to have different effects. And different strains are going to be better to help different symptoms. So that's where we really have to do the research. Now, what happened in Israel when the doctors there decided we're going to do some research, they went to the police department and said, just give us all the different weed you confiscated. We're going to study it.
And that's all of it. That's every kind.
You're right.
Right. And, well, yeah, you've got a huge selection of strains. And there's thousands and thousands of strains, and there's more coming up every year.
Exactly.
Well, I don't know why we can't do that.
And the ironic part is, here's what happened. In Colorado, there's a little girl by the name of Charlotte Figge. Now, at the age of 3 months, she was a twin, one of two girls. And at 3 months, she had a seizure. They took her to the doctors. They said, well, it was just some kind of seizure. We're not really sure what it was. One time, she went through it. She's fine. A week later, she had another. As time goes by, these seizures just accelerate in severity and frequency.
The other twin wasn't getting it, I guess.
The other twin was fine. And at this point, they were both developing at the same rate, learning to speak and walk and talk and interact. Eventually, the seizures got so bad where she stopped developing. Her twin kept on going, and she stopped. She was losing her ability to talk, walk, and or even feed herself.
Yeah,
totally bedridden. And that's when it got to the point where it took years for they finally diagnosed her with Dravet syndrome, which is the most severe form of childhood epilepsy.
Okay.
Now her mother and father, who were both Matt and Paige Figge, he was I think it was a Green Beret, and then the mother, they're both educated, very straight, never had anything to do with any kind of drug culture at all. They were exhausting all the traditional medicine that they could use. It got to the point where the doctor said, either we're going to give her this experimental veterinarian medicine for seizures, or we're going to put her in a medical coma just so her body can recuperate. Because not only was the Dravet syndrome wreaking havoc on her, but all the drugs they were giving her were wreaking havoc. One drug almost made her blind. Now, quite a few times her heart stopped, and she had to be resuscitated. So the father was in Afghanistan, and he whenever he had free times, he was just on the computer researching what the hell do we do. And they finally saw that someone had success treating Dravet's with cannabis. The wife, he talks to the wife finds a doctor. The doctor said, well, okay, let's try it, but we need to get another doctor involved. They get a second doctor involved. He's a little resistant at first, but then says, okay, after he meets Charlotte, they said they go ahead and decided to try it. Now, so she went to a dispensary and she said, I don't want to get my daughter high. What's the lowest THC cannabis you got? And we got this stuff that nobody buys because it's so crappy. So they had 2 ounces of it. She bought all of it for, I think it was $800 for 2 ounces.
Wow. She
had a friend of hers make oil out of it. And they more or less figured how many milligrams per 10 pounds of weight of the kid. They figured out a dosage. And normally this kid was having 300 grandma seizures a week. Man, this kid was just out of it.
300 seizures a week.
300 seizures a week, yes. Now, so the child had stopped developing and was now having brain damage. They gave her a dose, and the mother said, okay, 3 minutes went by, no seizures. 30 minutes went by, no seizures. Well, okay, fluke, whatever. 3 hours went by, then 24 hours. She went 7 days seizure-free after the first treatment.
After one dose.
Right. Well, I think they continued the doses as they went. I think they were giving her 2 doses a day. So fast forward, and meanwhile, everyone's going, oh my God, this is unbelievable. And the mother and father who were like, they were not advocates for cannabis, for drug use at all. He was a Green Beret. They were straight arrows. And they're saying, this is crazy, but it's working. Now, Charlotte's not only walking and talking, she's riding a bicycle, and she's a happy little girl.
There's so many anecdotal stories, and you can see them all over the place. But the good news is I tell you, backing up one thing, if you're interested in this topic, and there's one documentary that you watch, and it's on Netflix, it's called A Life of Its Own, The Truth About Medical Marijuana. It's amazing. I just saw it a couple weeks ago, and I've seen everything, all the documentaries. It is very well done, and it's very moving. The good news is smart people, most doctors are, take notice of these anecdotal stories, especially the ones who are involved, especially the ones who have patients who have tried some. The saddest thing about these kids who have epilepsy or other diseases and are affected by this, having seizures, is that, like Andrew said, the drugs that they give them are horrible drugs. The side effects are unbelievable. I mean, these kids, when they don't have seizures, because they're on some of these drugs or have fewer seizures, they're zombies. And you see them in some of these documentaries. They're zombies. They sleep all day long. Their eyes roll back from their head. So, I mean, what's the point? What's the quality of life there? But the good news is a lot of doctors are coming around and they're seeing this. And, you know, I'm going to read a quote. This is from the American College of Physicians, and it has to do with marijuana. They say, the American College of Physicians strongly supports exemption from federal criminal prosecution, civil liability, or professional sanctioning, such as a loss of license or credentialing, for physicians who prescribe or dispense medical marijuana in accordance with state law. Similarly, ACP strongly urges protection from criminal or civil penalties for patients who use medical marijuana as permitted under state laws. And the reason I went online and found literally hundreds of quotes from medical organizations, well-established and well-known doctors, medical doctors, as well as medical professors who have most of them were at one time thought this is crazy. It wouldn't be Schedule I if it worked. And now they're seeing their own patients and they're seeing the results, and this has got to change. I mean, I think that's important. And that's one of the reasons we're seeing the change. Another big reason why we're seeing the change we're seeing now is CBD. The fact that CBD can now be extracted by itself, pulled out of the plant, made into oil, tinctures, medicines that can be safely used by kids without smoking it, and without getting them high, without the psychotropic effect of being stoned or high, that's changed a lot of minds, because now doctors realize this isn't just a bunch of, potheads who want to be able to get stoned without getting arrested, who are making this argument about medical. Apparently, it actually works, and it works on a lot of different issues.
An important thing is that cannabis is used as a whole plant, not just extracting certain elements out of it, but using the whole plant. It seems to has worked for thousands of years. And also there's different ways to use cannabis as medicine. I mean, they have creams and salves, oils, obviously tinctures. But something that people have been doing recently, and that is juicing the whole plant. So that's when you just take a whole branch. Obviously take the stems off, throw all the leaves and all the flowers into a blender. I guess add whatever fruit or juice you'd like to add to it. And if you don't heat it, it's not psychotropic. Because what happens is marijuana in its natural form has the THCA, which is a THC with an acid molecule added onto it. Now, when you take that, if you ingest it, there's no psychotropic effect. But if you process it and drop the acid off it, and you do that by heating it. So like when you dry pot, it starts to what they call decarboxylate and drop that acid molecule. If you don't decarboxylate it and you don't heat it, you won't get high off it, even if it's really high in THC. So what people are doing.
Talk about better living through chemistry.
So when you juice it, you're saying
you don't get high.
It doesn't have, right, you don't get high.
There's no psychotropic at all, but you get this great benefit from it. And some people are having a lot of luck, especially with like Crohn's or lupus or other issues of the stomach.
For medical marijuana, there's a list that the AMA put together that they've requested research on. And these are some of the things they believe there's very strong anecdotal evidence that it's beneficial. That's for pain, obviously, for nausea. We know about people, smoking marijuana for the last 30 or 40 years when they have chemotherapy, and it works. I've watched it.
A lot of doctors say that cannabis is the best anti-nausea medicine there is.
Ever. That's right. They use it for HIV patients and other people who, have gastrointestinal issues due to chemotherapy or other drugs they're on. I tell you what, these days, it's so common to go to a doctor, even in a state where it's not legal, and if you're on chemotherapy and you go home after your chemotherapy and 12 hours later you're throwing up and sick as a dog, they'll tell you off the record, get some weed. It's the only thing that really works. We have drugs we can give you. Some of them work sometimes. Some of them don't work. There's other side effects. But cannabis works. Some of the other muscle spasms, obviously, multiple sclerosis, like we said earlier, anything that involves spasms. HIV, nerve pain, seizure disorders, Crohn's disease, and several others. So there's a whole list that the AMA is, and research departments and major medical universities are trying to get licenses to study, to get trials, to get human trials, to get the biggest problem, and Andrew alluded to it earlier, is there's one place to get marijuana from the government for testing, and apparently the marijuana they have is shit. They just don't do a good job. They don't keep track of the THC quantity. So that means when a research department gets it, first thing they got to do is spend a lot of it, and there's very limited amounts, just put it in the lab and figuring out what the hell's in it. What's the THC percentage? What's the CBD? What are the other compounds? Where are they? Because they need to separate all that stuff so they can do real testing. Like maybe for Crohn's disease, if you have a 14% CBD and a 1% THC, you get the best effect. These are the things that need to be tested. And I hate to say it, but the pharmaceutical companies are going to have to get involved because they're the experts. They're the ones would be best suited, and they're not anxious to do it.
And they have the resources.
They have the resources, but they're afraid that it's going to be very difficult to get patents on some of these things because it's a natural plant. So they're going to have to come up with ways of what the pharmaceutical companies are going to want to do is mix other compounds in there so that they can get a patent. And they'll probably put crap in there that you don't need. You know?
They patent roses, don't they?
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, that's true. That's true.
So what's going to happen is growers are going to start patenting specific strains, and that's what happened with Charlotte Figgy. The growers of the plant that they used, and they met the growers, and these guys are they're six brothers who are in business in Colorado, and they were so moved by Charlotte, and they loved Charlotte so much that they actually named the strain Charlotte's Web.
Wow.
And if you want to get Charlotte's Web, they're the only place in the world you can get Charlotte's Web.
Well, they may be having a lot more business.
Let's hope so.
They started a foundation where they basically give the marijuana, the cannabis, to the patients for pennies. For
cost or less than cost, because
less than cost. They give it to them because they can't give it to them, so they just give it to them for here's 10 cents an ounce or something, whatever.
Imagine how frustrating it must be to be a parent who has a child with just, for example, epilepsy, and the medicines turn them into zombies. They're 3, 4, 5-year-olds, and they don't work, and you go behind the government's back and you score some CBD oil and you start giving them drops under their tongue, and it works. What do you do as a parent? You're breaking the law. There's so many stories of parents who take their kids and move to a state where it is legal, and then they lose their jobs. It's just, the whole thing is so stupid. It's just ridiculous.
But the Charlotte Figgy story, it sounds like it's got a happy ending.
Charlotte's father, Matt, is quoted as saying, "I want to scream it from the rooftops. I want other people, other parents to know that this is a viable option."
So the Charlotte Figgy story ends with something of a happy ending. She's doing much better, and that's good news. But not all the news is good. There's a lot of very depressing and wrong news out there. Andrew, why don't you give us another segment of reefer sadness?
There's a couple in Georgia who gave their son marijuana to help his seizures. They just lost custody of their child, and now they're facing jail time. Matthew and Susanna Brill lost custody of their 15-year-old son, David, in April when some someone alerted the authorities that the boy tested positive for marijuana. The parents were charged with reckless conduct and spent 6 days in jail. This is these stories just never stop. I mean, these people, you have a child, and here's a young adult, 17-year-old kid, starts having seizures. And now we've heard Charlotte Figge's story. So should we exhaust all these unbelievably powerful pharmaceutical drugs on this kid and have to deal with all the side effects and sometimes permanent side effects? Or should we let's try cannabis like pretty close, right out of the gate or quick or soon thereafter? And it works.
That's true. And as we conduct this podcast, the big story in the news is children being separated from their parents at the borders because of a zero tolerance policy. Well, we've had zero tolerance policy in this country for decades, for generations now, and this 17-year-old kid is being separated from his parents, and it happens all the time. Now for the news. So now, Jay, you mentioned the research and particularly the things like MS. According to Leafly.com, the pace of cannabis research is actually escalating so far this year through 2018. And not surprisingly, the CBD research is the hot topic. And they have listed 5 studies that are making particularly important advancements. There's one about CBD treating brain changes caused by regular cannabis use. There's transdermal CBD treatment for addictions, non-opioid addictions. Plant-derived cannabinoids that improve the efficacy of cancer treatments compared to cancer treatments by themselves. There's a fast-acting CBD, long-lasting antidepressant effects that have been tested in rodents. And you mentioned, Andrew, how effective CBDs have been as an antidepressant. And one that particularly caught my eye, and Jay, you mentioned multiple sclerosis. There is a study to evaluate the efficacy of a combination THC CBD oromucosal spray. It's a product called Sativex as an add-on therapy for antispasticity treatment with patients for moderate to severe MS. And what they found was it was a study of 191 patients, 106 of whom were randomized in phase B to receive add-on treatment spray or a placebo. And what they found was the proportion of responders after 12 weeks was significantly greater with the THC CBD compound spray than the placebo. So the oromucosal spray provided better and really clinically relevant improvement of the resistant MS spasticity compared to administering just the first-line antispasticity medication by itself. So there's some progress.
Right now we have, I mentioned earlier, 29 states in one form or another have legal medical marijuana. And it's increasing all the time. I mean, what just a few years ago we had 1 state, then 2, then 3. So it's happening quickly, and it's happening for a reason, because there are results. People, especially in the medical community, know this is for real. All right, I've got a news story here, and it's actually, I'm looking at a story by Jordan Carney, and this is from The Hill back in April 16th. But it's important because it's been in the news. You've probably heard it. They're fast tracking a bill to legalize hemp as an agricultural product, and the majority leader, Mitch McConnell, is behind it because his state, Kentucky, hemp is a big product. And hemp is in our first episode, we talked quite a bit about hemp and its many uses in industry and how you can't get high from smoking hemp, so why is it illegal? Why is it lumped into Schedule 1 with what we'll call marijuana? But anyway, this bill is moving forward. It's called the Hemp Farming Act of 2018. And Mitch McConnell, I think Rand Paul, Ron Wyden, who's a Democrat from Oregon, and Jeff Merkley, who's a Democrat from Oregon, all supported the legislation. And I'll read here. The bill would allow states to regulate hemp, as well as allow hemp researchers to apply for grants from the Agriculture Department and make hemp farmers eligible for core insurance, according to McConnell's office.
So we've covered a little of the history, the chemistry, the physiology, and the legal status of cannabis in medicine. There was so much that we didn't cover, especially the use of cannabis not only as a treatment for opioid addiction, but as a way to avoid opioid addiction, as a substitute for the pain-killing effects that doctors are prescribing so much for opioids. We could devote a whole episode to that, and we probably will in the very near future. In our next episode, I'm going to explore the economics of cannabis and offer a free market argument for legalization of cannabis across the board. Now, we hope we've helped build your knowledge of cannabis and maybe provided some ammunition as you discuss this topic with others. You know, it's not a matter of if, but when cannabis will be legalized across the board, but it hasn't happened yet. And now is not the time to be complacent about it. Now is the time to get involved and get informed and especially to vote. And that's what we ask that you do. And if you like what you're hearing, we really hope that you'll check us out at VoteProPot.com.
Or send us an email at VoteProPot@gmail.com.
Please like and follow us at Facebook.com/VoteProPot.
Wish I was up in Vancouver at the Cannabis Cafe, smoking good old Sensimilla at the beginning of the day. But here I am in New York City, hiding out in Central Park, getting kidnapped by the police today sometime before dark. But I wish I was up in Vancouver at the Cannabis Cafe, smoking good old Sensimilla at the beginning of the day. The judge looked down upon me frowning. He said, kid, get on your way. Just don't start out your morning with espresso and a J. I said, I wish I was up in Vancouver at the Cannabis Cafe, smoking good old Sensimilla at the beginning of the day. Hitched on out to Portland, caught a ride up to BC, took the bus over to the neighborhood to have a bowl with my coffee. Now I'm up in Vancouver at the Cannabis Cafe, smoking good old Sensimilla at the beginning of the day. Smoking good old Sensimilla at the beginning of the day.